Hi, my name is Samantha Whitaker. I'm 29 years old, founder and creative director of Azure and Glass, an international design firm and owner of several boutique resorts, including one you may have seen in Architectural Digest last summer. But none of that mattered when my own family decided I wasn't good enough to be invited to my father's birthday. They thought I was still the dropout with unrealistic dreams, the disappointment they could forget in a group text. What they didn't know was that the luxury resort hosting their exclusive celebration, the one with their names embroidered on silk robes, belonged to me, and I was done being quiet. I stared at the message on my phone as the California sunlight poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my office. My name sat in elegant gold on the glass door behind me, Samantha Whitaker, but no one who mattered ever read it, especially not Vanessa. My sister's text blinked at me again, cheerful and cruel in equal measure. Hey Sam, just a heads up. We thought it's best you didn't come to Dad's birthday. Don't want you to feel out of place. Out of place. I let the words marinate like cheap perfume clinging too long to a silk dress. I stood from my desk and walked slowly toward the glass balcony, the ocean below, crashing against the private cliffs of Seacliff Legacy Resort, my resort. The breeze caught the hem of my ivory blouse, but it couldn't cool the sting behind my ribs. They still thought I was drifting somewhere in Southeast Asia, posting grainy travel content and sleeping in hostel bunk beds. That version of me, the naive dropout with a blog, was their favorite scapegoat. The truth was far less convenient. Behind me, the soft chime of the elevator announced Chloe's arrival. She stepped into the office with a tablet in hand, her brows raised in that calm, efficient way I'd grown to trust more than any blood relative. They've confirmed their reservation, she said, not bothering to ask about the message. She knew. Chloe always knew. The Royal Azure Villa. Arrival is this Friday at 4:30. 6 guests, all Whitakers. Of course, it would be the Royal Azure. Our most opulent. Infinity pool, glass bottom, spa temperature controlled wine cellar. Custom everything. Normally booked a year in advance unless you were family pulling strings through your imaginary connections. They think it's a corporate favor? I asked. Chloe's lips twitched. Vanessa believes she called in a favor from someone at Clarendon. She was very proud of herself on the phone. I turned back to the view, gripping the railing just tight enough to leave half moons in my palms. 5 years ago, I walked away from Clarendon Hospitality's executive program with nothing but a half-used inheritance and a stubborn need to prove I could do more than polish their outdated brand. They'd called it a tantrum. A phase, even after I ghosted them. Even after I stopped attending birthdays, weddings, holidays, they still thought I was just too proud to crawl back. Let them. Because in 5 years, I had built an empire behind a name they'd never bothered to Google, E.J. Whitaker. Travel blogger, then startup investor, then silent founder. Seacliff had grown from a blueprint in my head to 12 resorts on 4 continents. All operated under shell corporations, layers of anonymity layers that kept me close to the industry but far from their eyes. Until now. Confirm the staff training, I said, finally stepping back inside. No names, no hints. The owner is anonymous as always. Chloe nodded, tapping the screen. Done. Would you like to conduct the property walkthrough as yourself or under an alias? I hesitated for a second. The usual part of me, the cautious, distant part, wanted to default to protocol. Disguise, distance, control. But something inside me coiled and waiting wanted out this time. Neither, I said. I'll be Amelia Cross, Director of Guest Experience. Chloe looked up, genuinely surprised. You're meeting them? No, I'm greeting guests. I corrected, voice cool, just like we do for every VIP. Then I smiled sharp and thin. Let's give them the royal treatment and watch it burn. The woman who uninvited me just walked into my resort wearing knockoff Chanel. I caught the glint of the hardware on her purse from the security feed. Too shiny. Wrong shape. Vanessa always tried too hard. Her walk was brisk heels clicking confidently on the polished stone of the arrival deck like she owned the place. She always carried herself like that, like the world was a room she'd already claimed. Behind her came my parents. Charles looked vaguely impressed, craning his neck to admire the hand-blown glass chandeliers. Elaine, ever the connoisseur of judgment, narrowed her eyes at the entryway flower arrangements as if she were evaluating an enemy's weak points. I turned away from the screen and stepped into character. Tailored navy suit, hair swept into a sleek bun. The Seacliff badge read, Amelia Cross, Director of Guest Experience. I adjusted the lapel once before walking toward the front reception. The doors opened automatically as I entered the lobby. It was serene, bathed in soft coastal light with fresh jasmine piped through the air system and a faint melody from a live pianist drifting from the atrium. Vanessa barely glanced up from her phone before launching into her first complaint. We were promised a panoramic ocean view, she said to the concierge before noticing me. Her eyes widened, then narrowed. You must be the manager. I smiled crisp and professional. Welcome to Seacliff Legacy Resort. I'm Amelia Cross, your guest liaison for the week. We're honored to have the Whitaker family with us. Vanessa's posture straightened as she slipped her phone into her purse. Well, I suppose we're practically colleagues. I'm VP of Guest Relations at Clarendon Hotels. I'm sure you've heard of us. I could feel Chloe's amusement radiating from where she watched the feed upstairs. I kept my tone light. Of course, a very established name. Elaine stepped forward, removing her sunglasses with practiced drama. You look young to be in charge of guest experience. I've been in the industry a while, I replied. I tend to stay behind the scenes. Charles gave a small nod of approval. Nice property. Reminds me of an older Four Seasons. It's fully independent, I said. But we draw inspiration from many classic luxury standards. Vanessa leaned closer, her voice dropping like a conspirator's. Between you and me, we got this booking through a friend in the industry. Industry discount, you know how it goes. I tilted my head slightly, keeping the smile in place. That's interesting. According to our system, your stay was fully approved by the owner. Vanessa frowned. That can't be right. I pulled a favor. Nonetheless, I cut gently. Your suite is fully comped as per the owner's directive. Elaine's interest perked. Will we be meeting this owner? I've heard they're mysterious. Possibly, I said smoothly. But for now, let me escort you to the Royal Azure Villa. Your luggage has already been delivered. As I led them through the grand hall toward the golf carts, Vanessa began listing off champagne preferences, room temperature specifications, and a detailed itinerary of spa services she wanted moved to better accommodate her schedule. I made mental notes of her tone, the practiced arrogance, the subtle digs at anything not bearing the Clarendon brand. They still didn't recognize me. They didn't see the girl who'd once been told she wasn't strategic enough for the family business, the one who'd been laughed out of a boardroom for pitching experience-based hospitality instead of cost-saving renovations. That girl no longer needed approval. She was already signing the paychecks, just under a different name. As we rounded the turn toward the private villas, the sun caught the glass siding of the Royal Azure, casting fractured rainbows across the path. My mother inhaled, audibly impressed. This place is... She stopped herself. Expensive, Charles finished for her. Must cost a fortune to operate. Every detail here was curated by the owner, I said, motioning to the art installations, the bespoke woodwork, the infinity pool that curved like a mirror into the sea. Vanessa arched a brow. Sounds like someone with more money than sense. I didn't reply. As we arrived at the villa, I opened the doors myself and let them walk into the opulence. Elaine's heels clicked softly on the marble. Vanessa examined the champagne display like she was inspecting a specimen. Charles looked quietly stunned. I stood just behind them, invisible in plain sight. Vanessa turned toward me, suddenly remembering something. So this mysterious owner will be at the dinner, right? ChatGPT John Noy. The woman who uninvited me just walked into my resort wearing knockoff Chanel. From the control room, I watched her descend the seaplane steps with her usual practiced elegance, shoulders, squared chin, tilted just enough to command attention. Vanessa had always known how to enter a room like it owed her something. Her shoes sank ever so slightly into the imported white sand as she marched toward the welcome pavilion, trailed by a flurry of bellboys struggling to keep up with her matching rose gold luggage. Behind her, my parents followed at a more leisurely pace. My father, Charles, surveyed the surroundings like he was evaluating a prospective hotel acquisition. Elaine, immaculately dressed in pale mint linen, narrowed her eyes at the floral arrangements as if they were a personal offense. Nothing pleased her unless it had her approval stamped all over it, and even then only temporarily. I stepped away from the monitors and into the sunlight, the warm breeze stirring the edge of my blazer. As Amelia Cross, I'd practiced this walk dozens of times, calm, composed, slightly deferential, but never apologetic. This wasn't about vengeance, not yet. This was theater, and every actor had their role to play. "Welcome to Seacliff Legacy Resort," I said, my voice smooth rehearsed. "I'm Amelia Cross, Director of Guest Experience. We're honored to have the Whitaker family with us." Vanessa squinted behind her oversized sunglasses. Her expression didn't flicker. "Ah, yes. Finally. You know, I work in hospitality myself, VP of Guest Relations at Clarendon Hotels. I understand how much coordination it takes to pull something like this off." I smiled politely. "We appreciate experienced guests. It makes everything smoother." She took it as a compliment. Of course she did. Elaine slipped off her sunglasses with a soft sigh. "These flowers are nice." "I assume they're native," I lied. "Flown in from Kyoto yesterday, Mrs. Whitaker." Her eyebrows lifted just slightly. Victory. Charles remained silent, observing everything with that quiet, analytical detachment he always wore like armor. I wondered if he sensed something. He'd always been the closest to seeing me clearly until he didn't. "We're expecting oceanfront views," Vanessa said as we moved through the grand entrance. "And a personal butler. I made that request 2 weeks ago." "Already arranged," I replied. "Your suite was approved personally by our owner." That got her attention. "Our owner?" she echoed. "That's funny. I pulled a few strings with someone at Clarendon to get us in. Industry discount and all." "I'm sure your efforts helped," I said evenly. "But the owner extended your stay as a courtesy. All charges are covered." Elaine perked up. "Do you know the owner personally? I handle their special guests," I said, allowing just enough mystery to sharpen her interest. As we walked through the resort, Vanessa attempted to establish dominance with every step, correcting staff, critiquing color palettes, suggesting wine pairings for meals she hadn't yet ordered. I cataloged each moment: her condescension, her entitlement, the little digs meant to remind the world she believed herself important. She didn't recognize me, not even a flicker. That wasn't surprising. When someone spends their whole life looking down on you, they rarely remember the angle of your face. We passed through the coral garden walkway where wind chimes hummed gently above our heads. Vanessa examined the cascading orchids with barely disguised interest. "Do you happen to know who designed this?" she asked, trailing a perfectly manicured nail along the railing. I paused, then said, "An anonymous contributor. The owner prefers discretion." "A trust fund baby," probably, Vanessa muttered. "Inherited money and no idea how to spend it." I said nothing. Minutes later, we arrived at the Royal Azure Villa. Elaine gasped. Vanessa looked stunned, though she masked it with a critical purse of her lips. "This will do," she said flatly, stepping inside and tossing her handbag onto the suede armchair. Charles walked toward the balcony, letting out a low whistle. "The infinity pool looks like it drops straight into the ocean." "It was designed that way," I said. "To erase the line between what's yours and what's beyond reach." Vanessa gave me a glance, half curious. "That's a bit philosophical for a resort." "Some places were built to challenge perspectives," I replied. There was a beat of silence as they took in the space, the custom furnishings, the curated scent, the art pieces handpicked by the same girl they once called a failure. None of them saw it. None of them saw me. Elaine touched the edge of a sculpture. "Your sister was invited, wasn't she?" I tilted my head. Samantha Whitaker. Vanessa snorted. "She couldn't afford this place. She's probably hostel hopping through Thailand or whatever." I locked my smile in place. As I turned to leave, Vanessa called after me casually. "So this mysterious owner will be at the dinner, right?" She critiqued the champagne I personally selected. Twice. The first time she wrinkled her nose and muttered something about it being a bit too citrus-forward for a vintage brut. The second she asked if we had anything French that didn't taste like it was bottled during a monsoon. I smiled both times and jotted notes onto the tablet I carried, pretending to take her feedback seriously. Vanessa strutted through the spa corridor like she owned it, trailing behind me as if I were a junior intern giving her a courtesy tour. My heels echoed on the polished limestone, each step deliberate, controlled. I had designed every inch of this space, from the curved walls that mimicked ocean waves to the subtle scent of eucalyptus piped in through the vents. We passed the overwater spa pods, their glass bottoms revealing koi ponds below dappled sunlight shifting across the floor. Elaine let out a soft gasp, barely audible, but I caught it. She tried to mask it with a comment about how Clarendon's spas were more understated, less theatrical. Vanessa waved a hand dismissively. Honestly, it's nice, but a bit overdone. We go for elegance, not spectacle. I nodded politely. Of course, our owner favors experiential design, a resort that doesn't just host a guest, but transforms them. Charles, who had been unusually quiet, stopped to study a painting hanging near the salt rock sauna. His eyes lingered a moment longer than expected. This piece is familiar, he said finally, almost to himself. Didn't we see something like it years ago? Elaine's voice tightened. You're imagining things. I turned slightly. It's an original commission. The artist was inspired by familial memory, specifically the idea of something once cherished, now forgotten. Charles looked at me then. Really looked. His gaze flickered just briefly, and for a heartbeat I wondered if some part of him had recognized me. But then he glanced away, following Elaine toward the next hallway, and the moment passed. Vanessa took a sip from the third glass of champagne. Yes, the same vintage, and set it down with theatrical boredom. We'd never get away with this kind of extravagance at Clarendon. Too much overhead, too little ROI. Some owners are less concerned with profit margins, I replied, leading them toward the Ocean View villas. We approached the crown jewel, the Royal Tide Villa. The exterior shimmered with blue-tinted stone imported from the Aegean, cascading in a waterfall-like facade. Behind the tall glass doors awaited a suite that cost more per night than my sister's annual salary. Elaine stepped inside first and inhaled sharply. Vanessa followed her steps, slowing. The space opened into a massive sunken lounge framed by panoramic windows overlooking the ocean. Custom furnishings, hand-woven textiles, marble floors that bled seamlessly into a private infinity pool. A butler was already placing a fruit platter beside the fireplace. Charles walked directly to the far corner where a tall olive tree stood in a recessed atrium. He looked up at its branches, then down at the stone beneath it. The roots sat in a ring of carved pebbles, each etched with a name in cursive script. His voice was low. Is that? I answered before he could finish. The names belonged to people who once believed in the impossible. Vanessa laughed. Sounds like a marketing ploy. Possibly, I said, turning toward the hallway. But sometimes sentiment leaves stronger foundations than steel. They followed me into the master suite. Vanessa ran a hand along the velvet drapes, her expression unreadable. Elaine opened the wardrobe, inspecting the silk robes. Charles trailed behind his eyes, moving over the custom oil painting above the bed, a girl sitting beside a man beneath an olive tree, both mid-laughter sunlight dancing across their faces. I didn't look at it. Not directly. Vanessa suddenly turned. So who designed all of this? I met her eyes. Someone who wanted to make sure guests never forget where they are. Elaine tilted her head. Your sister was invited, wasn't she? I kept my voice light. Samantha Whitaker. She's quite well known in certain travel blogging circles. Vanessa snorted. She couldn't afford this place. She's probably in some hostel in Thailand, still trying to find herself. I didn't flinch. I didn't need to. Because in a few hours, they would know exactly what I'd found. This place feels oddly familiar. This place feels oddly familiar. Charles stood in the Royal Tide's private library, fingers grazing the spines of leather-bound books arranged by color and decade. The sun filtered through floor-to-ceiling windows, dust dancing in golden spirals around his silhouette. His voice had been quiet, almost absent-minded, but it hit harder than if he'd shouted. I was standing behind the butler's alcove, out of view, noting spa requests into the service tablet when I heard it. Elaine snapped her book shut. Don't be ridiculous. You've never been here before. Charles didn't reply right away. His hand hovered over a frame near the fireplace, an old photograph deliberately styled to look antique. A family of 4 backs turned to the camera overlooking the sea. It wasn't us, but it might as well have been. I didn't say I had. He murmured, "It's just the style, the layout. Something about it reminds me of that beach house in Carmel Samantha's sketches." Vanessa, who had just flopped onto the velvet chaise with a cocktail, scoffed. "You mean those crayon drawings she used to make, please? Let's not romanticize her mid-tier creativity." The girl peeked at a community college art show. I pressed my thumb harder against the tablet screen, forcing myself to breathe evenly. Elaine turned toward Charles with that tone she always reserved for when he got sentimental. "Let's not ruin a luxurious evening with ghost stories, darling. We're here for your birthday, not a guilt trip about the prodigal dropout." He didn't argue. He never did. But the silence he left behind buzzed louder than her dismissal. Downstairs, I reviewed the dining setup for the private welcome dinner. Gold-trimmed plates, imported linen napkins folded like orchids, the menu tailored down to the last amuse-bouche. Every detail had been handpicked to reflect what I knew about them, what they liked, what they pretended to like, what they wanted others to think they liked. Chloe joined me beside the grand piano in the terrace lounge. She wore black professional blending into the staff like shadow. "They're suspicious," she said softly. "Of me?" I asked. She shook her head. "Not yet. But Charles is sensing something. He keeps asking about design credits." "Let him," I murmured. "Let them all swim just close enough to the truth, then watch them recoil when it bites." Chloe hesitated. "And if he figures it out early, then he'll know who paid for every single fork they're using tonight." Guests began arriving at the twilight hour, the sky painted in hues of lavender and apricot. The Whitakers were seated at the head of the private deck, overlooking the ocean candlelight flickering across their expensive makeup and inherited confidence. Vanessa had changed into a pearl-toned gown that clung just enough to announce her curated fitness routine. Elaine dripped with heirloom jewelry pieces she once refused to lend me for prom, because you don't borrow elegance. You're born with it. I stood nearby, anonymous in black, watching as servers brought out the first course seared scallops over truffle polenta, paired with a limited batch white wine they'd never heard of but would pretend to appreciate. Charles took a sip, then frowned slightly. I've tasted this before." "Doubtful," Vanessa said. "Most wines are just overpriced grape juice with better branding." He didn't respond, only glanced at the wine label Whitaker & Cross 2018. One of the silent partners in my vineyard venture had insisted we honor the name. Vanessa, oblivious, turned to the staff. "We should meet the chef, or the owner. Whoever designed this menu deserves a Clarendon card." I stepped forward, then keeping my tone even. "I'll inquire. The owner has been known to make appearances at dinners like these." Elaine arched a sculpted brow. Tonight I paused just long enough. Perhaps. The second course came with sea bass glazed in miso honey and plated atop a swirl of lemongrass puree. Charles pushed his fork slowly through the fish, then looked up. "Samantha used to talk about opening a place like this," he said quietly. Vanessa rolled her eyes. "Samantha talked about a lot of things. Becoming a designer, a travel writer, a minimalist. She couldn't stick with anything long enough to pay rent." I tilted my head slightly. That's a harsh assessment of someone you uninvited to this very dinner. The table stilled. Elaine's fork hovered midair. Vanessa turned confused. What I meant, I smiled apologetically. That must be difficult. Excluding someone from a family event. I imagine she'd have appreciated this meal. Vanessa recovered quickly. She's probably eating rice from a vending machine somewhere in Manila. No hard feelings. I nodded slowly. Still, I think she'll find her way to the table eventually. Elaine narrowed her eyes. "Do you know her?" "Not personally," I lied. "But I know enough to say. She's not done yet." And that's when Charles said low but certain, "This whole resort, it feels like her. She's not done yet." The words hung in the air like a prophecy, spoken, forgotten, but impossible to ignore. After the dinner, I retreated into the operations wing where Chloe waited beside a bank of security monitors. Her expression was unreadable, but her fingers hovered over the main feed focused on the Royal Azure Villas lounge. "They're starting to suspect," she said. Charles especially. I stepped closer to the screen. There he was, alone, seated in the lounge, sipping another glass of the Whittaker and Cross vintage. His gaze was fixed on the fireplace where a stylized portrait hung above the mantel. It was abstract blues and silvers layered over the outline of a woman standing at the edge of a cliff. "She's not done yet," I repeated under my breath, watching him. Chloe folded her arms. "Are you?" I didn't answer. "Not yet." Back in the villa, Elaine and Vanessa were in the middle of a heated conversation. Vanessa had found an anonymous social media post praising the resort tagged vaguely with a line, "Sometimes the best revenge is being the view." "Sounds like Samantha," Vanessa muttered, waving her phone at Elaine. "Overdramatic and fond of cliffs." Elaine didn't seem amused. "Are you certain she doesn't know we're here?" Vanessa scoffed. "She's probably selling homemade jewelry in Bali. If she had the means to get near this resort, we'd know. Besides, who would she even be without the Whittaker name?" I turned from the monitor, jaw tight. They had no idea that the name meant nothing out here. Later that night, I changed. Gone was the Amelia Cross blazer and tied-back hair. I slipped into the shadows of the villa's main hall, moving past security with the ease of someone who built the rules. The art gallery wing, normally closed at night, was dimly lit, save for one spotlight illuminating a canvas titled Inheritance. Charles was already there. He didn't turn when I entered. "This one wasn't listed in the welcome guide," he said. "No," I replied softly. "It's personal." He studied the brushstrokes. "It's familiar, because it's meant to be," I said, "a tribute to the things we ignore until they disappear." Charles turned to face me, and for a moment I saw recognition flare. Just a flicker, a ripple beneath still water. "You remind me of someone," he said. I met his eyes fully for the first time. "Perhaps you're finally seeing her." He opened his mouth, but before anything else could be said, the soft chime of a phone interrupted us. Chloe's voice came through my earpiece. "Elaine's asking for you." Something about her champagne being flat. I gave Charles one last look, then stepped into the shadows. "She's not done yet," I whispered again. And this time I meant me. After years of silence and erasure, the truth finally spoke louder than the lies that buried it. The ones who cast her out now dined on the bitter taste of their own arrogance served cold on her silver platter. Justice isn't always loud. Sometimes it arrives quietly with receipts, signatures, and deeds of ownership. When injustice is met with unwavering resolve, even the most powerful walls can't hold against the tide of truth. Remember, the girl they uninvited now owns the ground beneath their feet. If this story moved you, share, subscribe, and comment your thoughts below. Type 1 if you felt her pain and her power.